I'm going to go through the reference mission that we have laid out for the ARTEMIS project. Just so I have an idea of what flavor this audit. Oh, yeah. Hiding back here. I think so. Is that good? Better? All right. So I get an idea of what flavor this ought to take on. How many of you were here for the earlier presentation and saw all the reference mission stuff that Ian went through? Half-ish. Okay. Good deal. And how many of you folks are already familiar with the ARTEMIS project and the reference mission and all that other than today? Okay, good deal. What we're going to do is kind of go through what we already, what I went over in the reference mission, but I pretty much do this as interactively as you all want to and get into as much detail as you want. In some ways it can be a bit of a brainstorming session, what people would be interested in seeing happen in this type of mission, and also information for y'all to ask questions and get a lot better idea of what it is we're planning on doing. So, the idea of the ARTEMIS project, or the goal of the ARTEMIS project, is to do this first space flight, which we're calling the reference mission. For those of you familiar with doing straw man engineering missions or designs or things like that, that's kind of what this is. This is what we've got sketched out as the reference mission, and it's what we compare everything else, all our changes and ideas to. The basic idea of the mission itself is 100% privately financed. That it'll be a manned flight. We'll put 2 to 4 people up. The current baseline is 3. And that we'll leave the transportation system in orbit so that we can reuse it. Also, what we don't have here is that we're going to leave the habitat there on the moon so that it doesn't have to be lifted again. So all we have to do is transport people and supplies and whatever excess equipment we want. Some of this we've talked about a little bit. The point again is that this baseline reference mission is to do a feasibility study and to compare changes and ideas to have a straw man to do things with. We're basing it on a shuttle launch, the costs on a shuttle launch, for reasons I talked about earlier. That's probably the most expensive way that that you can put something into orbit. And by baseline costs, that way we have a good idea of the maximum costs. And if we can make it work financially that way, then that's what we'll do. We've also got a host of backup ideas that we're comparing against this straw man. ELVs, there are a lot of people coming down the pipe with new launcher ideas that haven't happened yet, but all look real promising. And any of those can be integrated in when we actually start doing real spacecraft design as opposed to these view graph engineering things. Then it'll be time to start settling in on something concrete. But we'll need to know what's really going on at that moment when we do it. So, yeah, since we're talking about costs, this is the first flight costs. What we project we're going to need to be able to do this reference mission. The grand total down at the bottom, $1.4 billion. Some folks are going to say that's way too much, and others are going to say there's no way on earth you could do what you want to do for that much. Depending on what point you're coming from. If you're used to working in government aerospace programs, and that number is going to look a little small to you. And if you're used to just financing your house, it's going to look like a lot more money than you could ever imagine spending. The bulk of that money there, $800 million on the launch costs, is based on 2 shuttle flights. I know there's a lot of debate about how much money it really costs to fly the shuttle, and without getting into that, we picked the estimate that's around $400 million per flight to use, taking 2 flights to lift all the hardware up that we'll need to do the reference mission in flight. Just for comparison, go ahead. $1 billion is roughly what an offshore rig would cost for an oil company to put together and drill. So it's not though it's a lot of money, it's not something that people aren't used to financing and spending on big commercial projects. This is currently the baseline pressurized volume we're talking about using for the reference mission. One of the key points in what we're doing here is we don't want to reinvent anything that's already been done. We want to use off-the-shelf hardware. Now, off-the-shelf to me, off-the-shelf can mean a lot of different things. It's not Radio Shack off-the-shelf. It's aerospace world off-the-shelf, which means it's been built and done before, not that you can go pick one up tomorrow with a credit card. SpaceHab is the first commercial private manned spacecraft, and they fly these modules in the shuttle cargo bay as a replacement or a swap out for Space Lab, which is actually a government pressurized lab space. Some of the interesting things about the SpaceHab modules are that because it's a private company putting it together and leasing it to the government, the costs to build it, integrate it, are much lower than for the Space Lab, which is roughly the same spacecraft. Which is also one of the points that we're making with the ARTEMIS project, is that it's time now to be doing this privately. We can do it. We have all the background, all the legwork, all the design work that we've done it before. It's happened before. There's a lot of people doing a lot of private things in space, and we can make this happen now privately instead of having to rely on the government. We've got an artist in New Zealand who's been taking our conceptual designs and putting them together into 3D graphics and animations. And this, most of these, I think all of these pretty colored stuff are his. All based on using SpaceHab modules, either stacked singly like this one is. You can identify the SpaceHab module there. The 2 windows in the top about span the length of the SpaceHab module. The rest is tanks and engines and such. Those modules get stacked in 2s and 3s. They're designed to stack together end to end to make larger and smaller pressurized volumes. They've flown double modules on the shuttle. I don't think they've flown any triples, though they're doing work on a triple at the moment. So this is, like we talked about, stuff that's been done before and that we can make use of without having to go through all the expense of initial design, testing, checkout, proof testing, things like that. This is one of our older slides back when we were talking about using an already built pressurized volume. In this case, though, we were talking about using space station pressurized volumes, since Boeing was already building them and doing all the development work on them. And sticking it there in the space shuttle, this would be the half of the lunar habitat half of the mission. The other half would have the lunar transfer vehicle that we were just looking at. and you do 2 flights, leave them up there in orbit, and then rendezvous and proceed with the lunar flight. This is the whole thing put together with another option we've been considering. The one thing we talked about early on was being able to use an orbiting platform like the space station as a place to assemble. On the side. And I got to point it towards the thing. Here we've put together a space station made, a real simple one, made of a space hab module and some docking airlock adapters to be able to bring crew up with Soyuz modules instead of having to do it with the space shuttle. And then you have the lunar transfer vehicle, which is essentially a tug to push the habitat on the first mission up to the moon, and then bring the crew back after we've left the habitat module there. There's a shot of what we call the stack, which is all the stuff that's going to leave low Earth orbit and go to the moon. Separate view than what you were just looking at from the other end. This is the propulsion end of the lunar transfer vehicle, which goes to about here, and from here on back is, or forward in this case, is the habitat modules, triple space hab, and then the descent vehicle that allows them to descend on the lunar surface. And that's the one behind the screen here. The ascent vehicle, which we'll have some better pictures of in a minute. Here's that same stack from another angle, looking from the descent stage end and the rounded bottom of the space hab modules, leaving a space station to head out to the moon.
We're not in space quite yet.
Any which way, right?
Well, it's got words on it. You want to read the words?
All right, here is another view of that same stack. After it's split in lunar orbit, you have the lunar transfer vehicle being left in lunar orbit, and the habitation module, the descent stage, and the ascent stage all set and ready to descend to the lunar surface. This again is one of the older slides, but shows the idea that we drop or land the stack vertically on the surface, and then lower the habitat module down to a horizontal configuration to be able to better use the volume. Here we are, the same thing in lowered configuration with the space hab modules. Note that we've got the space hab module has it's a cylinder with an edge sliced off. That edge is the top when they're in the shuttle cargo bay. We're going to want to use that as a side so that we can see the landscape from inside the living space. Now, where are we going to land? We've had a lot of discussion, and we'll continue to have a lot of discussion on where the best place to land is. And a lot of people have their own opinions and good ones, which is why the debate's still ongoing. We initially picked a spot off of Crisium that originally was entitled the Sea of Snakes, when you translate it. Kind of messed with the spelling a little bit. It was Anguis, and we want to call it Angus Bay, rename it when we get there. Sea of Snakes doesn't sound like a place I want to live, and thought we'd make it a little more friendly sounding. It's a small bay off of Chrysium, there near the limb of the moon. There's a lot of good reasons for that. The first is that you can get shots like this of your hardware with the Earth in the background. That's one of the most popular photos that came out of the Apollo program, is a shot of the lunar landscape with the Earth just above the horizon. And that's one of the things that really fascinates people, is looking back to it. So that the limb, anywhere along the limb actually, is a good place to be able to get that kind of shot. Another reason this is a good site is it's in a lowland, somewhere flat, that makes the logistics of selecting and landing at a site much easier. There are highlands nearby, there are rills and possible latitudes nearby. The far side is also nearby. There are a lot of folks who see a lot of benefit to being on the far side. Folks such as the Sea League who are looking, that's the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is all now a private, non-profit effort. And once we're set and going and people are going to the moon, one of the things they'd be interested in having is some stuff on the backside where I don't have to listen to all the earthly radio noise and traffic. Good, quiet place to be. That's the reason we selected it. There are some ideas to go to the South Pole now, North Pole, looking for water. It looks like there's a real good chance of there being some water around. That may be a real good reason to move our initial landing site, maybe somewhere near the pole, to be able to take advantage of that. All that will shake out as time comes closer. Sure.
Did they find enough water or ice to make it really worthwhile? I've heard different reports.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the debate still raging there. Last I heard, and I don't keep real close tabs on it, so somebody else will have a better idea of this than me, but you've got some ice crystals deposited throughout the regolith to a depth of a couple of meters, was the last I heard from the data. Does that sound right to anybody? And when they add up the area they think it's in and all their millions of tons of water, I don't really know how much that translates to as being useful. 2 meters of regolith is a lot to dig through to get water out. And people tromping around down there and things going on will certainly change that a little bit. But that's one of the things we need to look into, whether or not it's worth going down there for the water. That's a rough place to be, too. There aren't a lot of flat, lowland type spaces to go there, and it's going to be hard to travel out of there, too. So, a lot to think of. Here's Vic's artwork of the habitat once it's down and the astronauts are out doing an EVA. You can see the habitat module laid on its side, the descent stage, which is going to remain there with the habitat module, and here the first good shot we have in the presentation of the ascent stage. There's also a lot of talk about burying this habitat module once we get it up there. A lot of good reasons to do that. The windows are not a good reason to bury it, though there are some ideas for taking care of that. Ideas like the ones we've been talking about before, but like Peter's got in his little habitat set up there in the display room with the Z-shaped windows, things like that. The way we do that is with a small robotic bulldozer, actually more of a sweeper. I don't know how well the regolith will bulldoze. There's some doubt as to whether or not it's amenable to bulldozing. But something to be left behind to do that after the astronauts left for the first mission. And of course, just another view of the same thing from the back end. You can see the descent stage propulsion elements here. The habitat's pretty much hidden back behind all this. You can kind of see the edges of it, the flat side of the space ad modules, and the ascent stage there. That was a pretty shot with all Dick's 3D rendering and all. And this is what the ascent stage looks like. Early on, we decided that in reality, there's not a lot of reason to have those guys buttoned up inside the pressurized volume to bring them back up to lunar orbit to rendezvous with the lunar transfer vehicle. And there's a lot of reason to shed all that extra mass and complexity. A few folks have said, well, you know, going that fast, you want to be protected. But in reality, when they're in lunar orbit, or say the shuttle in low Earth orbit, you're going pretty fast then, and those guys do EVAs. And there shouldn't be a problem with it. Greg Bennett, the founder of the ARTEMIS project, during the day is an EVA engineer, works with the astronauts in Houston, and so he's shown this around, and most of the reaction has been, oh great, I want to fly it. So kind of a fun idea, but it's also a very practical one. It ought to help us get more cargo onto the surface of the moon. There's the ascent stage leaving. There's some talk of leaving cameras there so that we can get footage and shots of all this stuff as it goes on, which would be a lot of fun to watch and show at presentations like this afterwards. There's also talk of landing some small robotic type landers before the stack lands on the moon, so we can get some good footage of the thing actually coming down initially. Something which we haven't ever seen. We've seen shots of the Apollo crew leaving the moon, and but we've never seen shots of anybody arriving at the moon. That'd be a neat thing to have. Here the ascent stage is rendezvousing with the lunar transfer vehicle. The astronauts will, well, they're already doing an EVA, but we'll do an EVA to enter the lunar transfer vehicle. They will, Ian said, lash the thing to the lunar transport vehicle this morning. Probably be a little more complicated than that, but we'll get, the point here is that we'll be taking it back with us to low Earth orbit so that we have a vehicle to transit to and from the surface of the moon with, and then a separate vehicle to move from Earth orbit to lunar orbit. That's them. That's the basics of the reference mission that we've outlined. Going back to the poster, you can see all those elements put together and kind of see the trajectories we take between the two. This, of course, from the lunar view. And this poster, as well as postcards and most of the stuff you've seen, they have copies of in the dealer's room that Lunar Traders is selling, if that interests you. On the bottom here, can't quite, there we go. www.asi.org. Those of you connected to the web, that's the Artemis Society International's website. Currently the home of the Artemis project on the web. And part of what we've done as the Artemis Society's piece of the whole Artemis project puzzle is to put this website together. A lot of these images are on the web. There's some neat things like a virtual tour of the moon base. You can get your browser going and actually walk around the moon base, look at it from all different angles. If you're interested in more detail about that. Are there any questions in general about the the reference mission. Yeah.
Yeah, you were taking the ascent stage back. Was that the implication that you're actually going to use as the descent stage later? That it'll be used for both?
Yeah, it could be if all you need to get down is crew and a little bit of cargo. That's right. Now the way we've got it put together and designed now, it wouldn't function as a descent vehicle because it doesn't have any legs, that type of stuff.
So I was wondering what the value was in bringing it back.
You don't have to station keep in lunar orbit, which, depending on how long you're there, lunar orbit's not terribly stable. It's harder to keep stuff in lunar orbit than, say, Earth orbit. A lot of station keeping involved.
Well, right, but if it doesn't land again, there's no reason to do anything
Right.
but eject it.
That's right. Yeah, there is. I'm sorry? Right, yeah, if we're going to use it as a lander, if we can take it down. The other thing is you can attach it to another, say, stack, whether you're bringing down another habitation module or any of that stuff.
Oh, yeah, you can land with it. I mean, take off.
Right, yeah, not using it itself as a lander.
Yeah, because it doesn't serve any other purpose like a lifeboat because it isn't pressurized, so. I
Right.
was just wondering what other missions it could have on its own.
Now, that's all it can do is get people off the surface.
You showed how the two modules were connected, and I couldn't tell if you were using some standard connection module that exists for those two, and whether that goes down with the habitat or up. Yeah, that one doesn't really show it as much. The
No, it's the
connection
other
between
end.
the two is the other end, yeah.
If you've got a stack or the station picture.
Is that another space station style module?
Yeah, I think, this is Greg's expertise, but there are some standard T-shaped
Yeah,
docking or airlock adapters.
right, one of the first things we're gonna launch.
Right. And that's what we're talking about using. There we go.
That in the middle.
That's a decent shot of it. We want a T-shape, and that actually goes down with the habitat module and stays on the surface.
So that's another docking door on this side, but it's also the egress door when they get down?
That's right.
Okay.
We may use the one that's connected to the LTV as the egress door, since it'll already be functioning as a door between the transfer vehicle and the
Right.
habitat.
Okay.
And at the moment, we're doing a lot of, oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Thing coming off the side.
Do you have any, have you worked up how you're gonna use the interior volume of this thing yet?
Not in detailed layout form. We've talked a lot about the different kinds of things that we want to take along with us, which is part of what I wanted to get into next is what kind of stuff do we want to take. In and of itself, putting a couple of 3 people up there for 2 weeks will take up the bulk of the volume. And that's not a lot of space for a couple, or for 3 people to live in. But there are a lot of other things we'd like to take up with us. It'd be fun to set up a radio telescope that wouldn't be on the far side. There's some real simple setups that you can put together that we could use, maybe on the back side of a hill that doesn't see the Earth or something similar. There are a lot of materials processing ideas that nobody's had a chance to try. That'd be something else we'd really like to do on the first mission. There's oxygen extraction, all sorts of metal extraction, the rest of the volatiles. Nice to take a processing plant. Lots of high quality imaging equipment, both still and movie. One of the things we'd like to do is go up with predetermined scenes or shots that somebody would like to use in a production and bring those back.
Wouldn't it make more sense to take up a prospecting and testing lab so you can test the active materials that you find in the area, customize the oven processing plant, send that out to the next mission?
Yeah, you're talking about finding out exactly what's in the soil where you landed before you send out a little,
Yeah, because you don't want to come back with tons and tons of material. It's like to test as much as you can there, or in fact, some interesting stuff, just for final testing, and see back a customized process that will have it for the next mission.
yeah, there's a limited cargo capacity on the ascent vehicle
Yeah.
to bring that type of stuff. Yeah, I don't, when I said a materials processing plant, not necessarily a full up thing. And that, that depends highly on what we know about the site already and what we need to know to really do the good experiments. Yeah.
I'm sure I was a little late. I missed your description of the propulsion stages. That said that was off the shelf, so you would just be using solid stages or liquid stages?
Yeah, aerospace off the shelf, which means not even in the store actually. Yeah, we're talking. We've talked about different things. A lot about using LOX hydrogen for the linear transfer vehicle. Things that we already know work and work well, that we're really familiar with, is what we want to stick with for the initial stages. If we have to start doing hardware development, by that I mean new concepts or things that people already aren't making and using pretty reliably, then we're going to get into a lot of trouble keeping costs down. So
The drawings sort of remind me of, I think it's an RL-10, on the Sunfire upper stage.
yeah, the RL-10's, I'm pretty sure what Vic's been using for his artwork, and one of the best candidates from the point of view I described, of trying to get something we already know works and works well.
Well, I keep monopolizing the questions, but you say it's a 2-week mission, is that so you got two weeks of daylight?
Yeah, planned, so they're pretty much just the whole day.
You think if you landed closer to the South Pole, you might extend that to 3?
Yeah, that's one of the advantages of going to the pole, is it gives a possibility of extending the mission. There's also some merit to being there partly during the dark. At the moment, we've got it there during the day, but like I said, this was a straw man to shoot at with ideas like that. I saw a hand over. Yeah.
I know NASA was, after Challenger, not too happy about putting liquid hydrogen inside the shuttle.
Yeah, that would be one of the big things to tackle. They say that, but of course they got a lot more strapped to the underside of the shuttle to start with. I mean, so it's not a thing that cannot be done, but it's certainly something that will require jumping through a lot of hoops to do. On the other hand, if the astronauts are excited about doing something, they're a lot more likely to take a lot of pains to make it happen. I mean, the safety folks down there are a lot more likely to help get the hoops jumped through to make sure that it can happen. But that definitely one of the bigger challenges, and one of the reasons that it may be a good idea to ship the crew up separately from the rest of the hardware. One of the ideas we had was to use expendables to put the LTV and the habitat module up, and then just send the crew up on the shuttle or somewhat.
There was about 5 tons of support gear that went with the Centaur and the shuttle. Most of that was helium bottles so that they could dump it in case of emergency.
Help it how? I'm sorry?
In case of abort, they had to be able to dump the hydrogen in like 4 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the other things. One of the other reasons to use the shuttle as a baseline, if we can work it out to fly on the shuttle, then we can work it out to fly on just about anything. That's about as stringent a standard as you can get.
Would it make sense to send the expensive hardware up on the shuttle along with maybe the crew, and then send the fuel up on expendable?
Yeah, that's possible.
You need to have a refueling scenario anyways if you're gonna do a repeat, repeat cycling to the moon.
Yeah, we've talked about integrating the tanks to the spacecraft in orbit. That's not something anybody's done before.
Well, I'm just talking about send up the hardware with the tanks on it that only fuel them from an expendable rocket.
Oh, right, or fuel, initially fuel
Because
the
you're gonna have
tanks
to
in orbit.
send up a fuel later on just to refuel it, so the
Yeah.
tanks will already be there.
Gonna have to have that capability already. Yeah, there's a whole host of things we need to look at. One of them is refueling, and that's one of the things we're gonna have to tackle before we're able to do it, is fueling on orbit. There's some folks at NASA looking at cryogenic propellant management to be able to do long-term storage and management of cryogens in orbit. I'm eagerly awaiting seeing what they come up with. Kind of hard to pump liquids without some type of, it's not as easy as it is here. You pull it off the bottom of the tank. There you need to be moving or accelerating to push things to the bottom of the tank and have, feed it that way. Or, there are a lot of different challenges to actually transferring propellant in orbit, but it's something we have to tackle. As I mentioned earlier, some of the things we want to do to be able to fund it, any of the projects we take up, if we can find people who are interested in seeing a project of theirs and have the money to fund it on the lunar surface, say the CD League, folks interested in lunar processing, things like that. Those are the types of things we want to take up, but also, and probably more practically, we want to plaster the thing, if you call this practical, plaster the thing with logos. That's how they fund Indy cars and NASCAR races and things like that. And it's a good way to fund things, and that's part of the idea of the ARTEMIS project, is to sell the excitement of a manned space flight. And that's how we're going to fund it. You probably won't get a lot of takers on a stock offering just to fly the mission. There are a lot of folks, probably a lot of folks here at this conference, yeah, I'd love to buy stock in something like that. We had enough folks at this conference to fund that type of stuff. We'd be holding a different kind of conference. But the general public is where the money needs to come from, and one of the best ways to tap into that is the entertainment value. Folks like Disney is wonderful at exploiting a concept or an event or an idea, and putting that idea into just about anything you can imagine. I don't know how many of y'all have kids and have things like Lion King shoelaces, but it's that type of thinking and marketing and all that we're going to need to get into to be able to sell the excitement of a manned space flight and raise the funds to be able to do it. Are any more questions? Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised the number was 1.4 billion, but so far I've actually seen you present this twice, and both times you were talking about 2 launches to get this going. But now twice we've seen indications that it's going to take 3 or 4. One is if you use your own space station, obviously you have to get that hardware up.
That's right.
Now you just made the illusion you might send the modules up and then separately fly up the astronauts. So I'm just wondering, I haven't heard a scenario in which 2 launches alone is going to get you to the moon.
The 2 alone would be the Strawman reference mission, where you took 2 shuttle flights to raise the hardware and the crew.
And made it without any low Earth orbit mechanism?
Without a facility. That's right. It'd have to be a docking of the 2 pieces alone, without a strong back or anything else. That's right. part of the reason the station idea was in the reference mission presentation is because it sure makes a good picture. And we really like Vic's artwork, but that's one of the things that by the third or fourth mission, you know, by the time you start talking about, yeah, we did it once, people are excited about it, it's time to do the next one, the next one, the next one. Then things like a station, your own small thing make a lot of sense.
And your plan also is assuming you have to carry the entire cost of the shuttle mission. Now you're using almost all of the cargo capacity when you have the triple.
That's right.
And when you take your 3 astronauts up, that only leaves one, at most 2 people who do work other than fly the vehicle.
Right.
But is there any possibility you don't have to carry the entire cost because there are other mission objectives that are being handled?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that possibility, and that 400 million for a flight is
Is the high number.
yeah, is a high number, and something we are using, because if we can make it work, it'll work. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to hopefully reduce those costs. I don't know how much I believe an estimate of what the shuttle really costs to fly. There's so much involved in that. I don't know that you can really nail that number down.
Well, there not been many people who had to negotiate and
That's
actually
right.
receive an invoice for a flight, so it's kind of hard.
That's right.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add on to that, one of the good reasons for taking the high numbers on it is because when you have a risky venture, you can guess that maybe we know ways of bringing these costs down on using the launch vehicle, but there are also lots and lots of unknowns, and those are going to be hidden costs, time, schedule, slips, and so on. If you factor in ahead of time something that costs maybe twice as much as you really honestly believe it is, you might actually come somewhere close to what the real cost is going to be.
That's right. You don't know that you'll be able to reduce costs, but you know they're going to go up.
Yeah.
For sure. So, yeah, and that's been kind of our approach, is try to take a good, reasonable cut at what it would cost for, say, project management, and double it, or triple it for a baseline. Yeah.
If you go with the baseline of the 2 shuttle missions, aren't you potentially going to run into some timing issues? Your second mission goes up, you've got assembly time, you've got transit time, the 2 weeks or plus, 2 weeks plus on the moon, transit time back. You're pressing past the length of a shuttle mission then. Would you almost need a third mission to go up to do your pickup then and return the astronauts?
Yeah, almost. It's right at the limits. They've been slowly extending the duration. I don't even remember what the longest mission to date has been. Is it 16 days? 17? It could be 2 weeks minus a weekend if it needs to be. And that type of thing exactly could drive us down to a 10-day mission instead of a 2-week or something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of logistical problems. Yeah.
Well, if you can access the space station's assembly point, a lot of that time constraints would disappear. 'Cause
That's right. Yeah, if
you
you
can return, you just go back to the space station and park it there.
right.
The slide is one.
And assuming you had a space station, the International Space Station, or a smaller one with a Soyuz return capsule attached to it, that's a way home as well. Yes?
Is the technology there yet for long-term reusable liquid hydrogen tanks? I read something about that was one of the problems with the Delta Clipper, because if you use liquid hydrogen tanks over and over again, you have some problems.
Yeah, the answer is almost. They're working on it. I know NASA's doing a lot of cryogenic storage and or cryogenic fuel storage and management work right now, trying to address a lot of those problems. Just a lot because of things like X-33 Venture Star, Delta Clipper. If we're going to do that type of stuff, we need to be able to manage the fuel. And that means both keep it cold and be able to move it around when needed. So one of the things that's gonna need to come along and be demonstrated before we go, or else we're gonna have to shoulder part of the cost of doing it. So, yeah, that's another of the technical issue. 3 more questions? Thanks, I really appreciate y'all listening.